people and places elhlelo lamhla ke bangwane sitabe sinendvuna lapha umnumzane Neal Rijkenberg lo taba yakhuluma ngendzaba levelile lapha nebenkosi indzaba levele ngesimanga sekuthi bantwana besikolo ehlukehlukene lapha eveni lakangwane abakathole ama-allowances abo kepha ke bangwane nje bangishito ngaphambilini ukuthi lamhla ngaso singisi empeleni kuze kuthi kutovakala kabanti ngoba abantwana beva sona lesingisi. A very good evening to you viewers and welcome once again to People and Places. And tonight on the show we are very grateful to have the Minister for Finance, Mr. Neal Rijkenberg, who is with us to explain exactly what is happening with the student allowances. But before that, we should all be aware that in our headlines tonight and also on the newspapers tomorrow, they'll be screaming about represented to the Ministry of Labour and Public Service about delayed allowances. Maybe in the meantime, just before we cross over to the Minister, let's just have a look at the presentation of the petition.
Labafundziki labaqhamuka ke emakolishini emanyuvesi lahlukahlukene lapha ke eveni lakangwane bebakathi ke bayawumikisa yona ke incwadi yetikhalo kulo ke litiko libuketona ke tisebenzi nehlala kahle lapha ke eveni lakangwane. Labafundziki bavetile ukuthi sesithe isikhathi ke bangatholi wona ke ema-allowance lokwenta ukuthi kube likhuni ke kufundza kwabo nekuhlala kwabo ke lapho khona bacashe khona sokumatima.
Sithe ke lana sibafundzi from the various tertiary institutions in Swaziland to demand the immediate release of allowances abafundi. We are aware lokuthi kunema students e-UNESWA nje kuna over 50% of students laba solo bangawathola allowances sukela kuvuliwe. Institution yase-UNESWA ke yavulwa ngoNovember last year, but till date solo kude umfundzi loyitholile leyo mali leyo. Kubhlungu kakhudlwana abafundi abakhona ikhompyutha eklasini asikhonje vele kufundza and nyalo bekumele sibhale exam mhla ka9 e-UNESWA ngeke ke exams zasibhale vele and ama-institutions onke we declared lokho ukuthi siyawavala onke la kangwane until kuze kuphume ama-allowances abafundi. Kude umfundi etawufunda online noma ngabe angasho lama-administrations alama institutions ngokuthi bafundza bayofunda online angeke sitawuhamba thina as leadership yasinas.
Well, yes, an interview there with one of the representatives of the students who's saying that they'll be closing the institutions until their payments have been made by government. Well, tonight I'm grateful to have the Minister for Finance, Mr. Neal Rijkenberg. Minister.
Good evening. I'm not sure if you can hear me or you're breaking up slightly there, Mr. Mamba, but good evening. Thank you for having me on the show.
I believe this afternoon you made a 9-point statement about the situation that I've just spoken. Would you like to tell us more about what the statement was all about, Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Mamba. Yes, let me try and do that. Let me try and unpack what the statement was on. I think it was just trying to put some clarity on this matter with these allowances. As a country stepping up to the plate and to say the students are correct, these allowances have fallen due. Obviously, I'm not so sure about the old outstanding ones. I'm aware of the ones in March that have now fallen due. And I think what we're unpacking was, and that is that number one, what's caused this problem? I think government has quite a substantial budget for student allowances or the scholarships as a whole, if I can put it, managed by the Ministry of Labour. What we have though is there's a lot of pressure on this. There are a lot more students needing the loans and the scholarships than what the ministry has managed to fit in within their budget. And so this last year, the ministry, I think, has been trying to almost fit a little bit too much into what they really could afford, meaning that by the time they got to the end of their budget cycle, for supplementary budget, we managed to get an additional 15 million for them in the supplementary budget, but that was still not enough for them to cover, because when the year closes at the end of March, one should be covering the month of April's allowances. Unfortunately, by then they had run out of budget, and so we're expecting that as the new budget cycle starts, one will be able to try and accelerate that and try and get these allowances to be paid out as soon as possible. and hence the budget has the old year's budget in the month of April. It's quite a mad rush to get the old year closed and to get the new year started. The new year's actually starting. So interestingly enough, the budget has now been closed the previous year only. There were certain delays there, but which means that we'll now be working quite aggressively on trying to get these allowances done, and we are all committing to, again, the Minister spoke at the end of May, but we feel like if we can accelerate things, we're looking at the second week of May is when the allowances will be able to be paid. And unfortunately, no pressure. There's not too much we can do. Not a lack of cash. We would have. There is always a certain amount of cash available, and one would have prioritized it towards an urgent payment like this. It really is a systems problem, and something that because even if we try and accelerate it, it still needs a lot of inputting. So this new budget needs the Ministry to be able to input every name, every amount, and unfortunately, this does take a short while. So we're looking at about 2 weeks until the actual money starts for students.
Thank you very much, Minister. I hear that in 2 weeks' time, definitely there will be payments to the students. But however, I realize that some of the problems that the ministry, or even the government, or even the country itself has been faced with is the issues around COVID, which is the whole economy. Now, how do you hope to circumvent this situation?
So, Mr. Mamba, I think first of all, Shem, the line is clear. But if I get you right, I think you're asking something about the COVID. And yes, we did mention in our statement. We did mention obviously the world at large is having trouble financially, and hence we couldn't come with a higher supplementary, which means that last year we would have hoped, because the ministry saw it coming and was hoping to get a bigger supplementary, but because of COVID, obviously we had to spend money on many different other places, and we can only allocate an additional 15 million to the ministry because of COVID, the climate change impacts, and all the rest, what is happening in the country that unfortunately all needs funding to go towards to.
Yes, I hear you, Minister. And social media has been abuzz with the fact that there has been diversion in the money. Has the money really been diverted to some other coffers?
Mr. Mamba, unfortunately, obviously we know social media is abuzz all sorts of nonsense, sorts of lies, and people advantage of tough situations. Definitely not. There's no such thing as a budget line diverted to somewhere. Never the country is something like that taken place, and for sure wouldn't be the case now. So definitely not the case, Mr. Mamba.
Minister, and I hear also that there's too much demand against supply. Now, in the future, going forward, is this going to be sustainable?
What we're doing, Mr. Mamba, and that is that I think what we need to recognize. Myself coming from the private sector, also seeing how we can be, and government has got institutions that provide credit and again get repayments, which means get the credit back very professionally. We've got institutions that do that, but as core government, which means as government internally, we really aren't great at all when it comes to actually issuing credit, which means that scholarship allowance, whichever you can look at it. We're not great at dishing it out, and we're definitely not great at collecting it. We're not that bad dishing it out. Obviously, we have instances like having now, which is a bit of a glitch. But at the same time, we definitely are terrible at actually collecting money back that we have distributed as government. So what we've done is the Ministry of Labour and the Ministry of Finance are working hard together, where we are planning on taking the scholarship fund and putting it into one of the banks. Which means that, and as we know, banks are very efficient. Banks will be able to handle this a whole lot more efficiently than government. But I think the beauty of putting it into a bank, it'll then be what you call a revolving fund, which means that every year government is putting there a few hundred million that they budget for scholarships. It'll be going into the fund. But it means that whatever the bank is collecting the scholarships and even the ones that they are issuing, that money is not coming back into the fund, meaning that in time this fund can grow quite substantially, and hopefully in a few years' time, instead of it being a 350, 400 million amounts that we have for scholarships, that can quite quickly grow to $1 billion, $500 million, $2 billion in time. And it would mean that, number one, it'll be done professionally, and number two, it means that there's a whole lot more available for, because now it does feel like there is a bigger demand for than what governments can currently keep up with. And I feel a revolving fund like that in professional hands is the way to go. It's being drafted. I'm hoping by the year we will have, and we'll actually change the total way that that the totals are being handled. And I believe it'll be a sustainable, much better way of dealing with it than constantly having problems like we're facing with what we're facing with today. I mean, we've had it a few times, and somehow we're still battling to get on top of it. It's embarrassing. It's not right. And I believe there's a very sustainable solution in the pipeline.
Like at Kudi, I can hear, Minister, about that initiative from the banks. And, well, banks are very stringent with regards to getting back the money, collecting the money. Is it going to be easy for the students? I know it's going to be easy for government, but how about the students?
Look, again, the student loans around the world go to banks for student loans. I mean, we're not inventing something new here. The banks obviously will be very strict. If you have employment, you do have to really start repaying your loan. So come in there. But again, as student loans around the world do consider, if you haven't found a job yet, or if you are still sitting at home, or you are battling for whatever reason, that will be considered and that will be looked at. So I don't foresee it necessarily it'll put pressure in the right place, is my view on the matter.
Initiative now, I've heard that there's about an increase of about 800 students, and was that part of what caused this deficit?
That aware of it. I've also just been brought up to speed recently on the fact that what they were budgeting for, what we have a budget for, they were trying to just squeeze in more students to try to assist. Really, I mean, it's the root of this problem is coming from actually a very good place from the Ministry of Labour. You know, where they're really trying to get extra bang for buck, trying to fit more students in the program than what it really I think was designed for in the first place. And that's the main reason for the stress and strain we're finding ourselves in. I didn't realize it was as many as 800. I would have presumed it was less, but I've also heard a figure of 800 recently.
In the morning, there was a presentation of a petition, and expeditiously you came out and made a response. Was that response directly or prompted by the reaction of the students, or it was just planned before?
Obviously, over the last few days, we've been seeing this coming, Mr. Mamba. You know, wasn't a big surprise that the students are now taking to the street. You know, we realized already early in the week that that really with the moment one sees the allowances are not going out, one knows there's trouble here. Minister of Labour was also aware that this is there. So this morning, before the strike, I had a good chat to my team. Said, guys, let us prepare a statement so we can just officially put forward. And unfortunately, as you can see, the statement isn't saying we're going to be able to pay tomorrow, as everyone might like to hear. We really are still saying in 2 weeks' time. But one's hoping that people can understand, people can now plan accordingly, people can see, you know, I mean, if it's coming in 2 weeks' time, how do we handle that? What do we do about it? And hoping it can create a bit of calm around the situation.
I understand you very well, Minister. Now, let me get to some personal issues. You are one of the most decorated business persons in the Kingdom of Eswatini, and you are now in government. So what advice are you giving to government? Because we do realize that there are some screws that are loose within the government spending. What advice do you give government?
Mr. Mamba, we've it's not necessarily advice. Unfortunately, advice is I'm now on the inside of government. So when I was on the outside, I was very clever and I'd give lots of advice and easily criticize government for all sorts of things going wrong. Now that one is in government, you know, now all of a sudden the shoes on the other, and I find myself now actually needing to try my best. You know, obviously government is a very big structure. One can but and again, it's definitely not a one-man show, but as a Ministry of Finance and as a government of the day, we have been looking at all of these, the bigger problems that we have been having in a country that's been causing very serious financial constraints on our resources. And one of them really is we are on an unsustainable path, which means that we are loaning too much money than what is sustainably good for us. Now fixing that is just unfortunately very, very painful. Our fiscal, one looks at what you call the fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit means the amount of, comparing to G, the amount of money that you are spending versus the amount of money that you have. In other words, the amount of money you need to loan. And we come from a fiscal deficit of about 7.5%. And we've been working very hard with the IMF, the World Bank, AFDB, specifically those three, to get us 1% fiscal deficit. 1% meaning you're on a sustainable path, which means that 1% fiscal deficit means you just have a little bit of GDP growth, and it means that your debt to GDP ratio does not grow. So that's what we've been focusing on very hard as a government, really, and bringing down our expenses. At first, when we laid the plan forward, it was pre-COVID, and we were planning on also doing some revenue measures, because obviously the only way you're going to fix this is by either decreasing expenses or increasing revenue. It's really economics 101. But because of COVID and because of the unrest and because of the climate change issues that have hit us, and now the Ukraine issue, we have really realized to just try and lift taxes is not the right time to do. What you hear of me talking about in the tax lifting space, it is tax moving. It's moving tax from the rich to the poor, getting a lot of criticism for that move. But the objective there is not to get more money for government. We are trying to just fix the inequality problems that we have in the country. But we have been working very hard on the expenses side. So what we've been doing is, if you recall, the previous year was 24.4 billion. Last year it came down to 24 billion. This year it's come down to about 23 billion, 23.1 billion. So reducing the expenses while we are having these crises, while there's inflation, while we are battling all sorts of things, is a very, very tough task to do. But unless we get our country on a sustainable path, we can't even start talking, because we are, the lights are going to go off at some point. If you recall, we had about 6 billion emalangeni of arrears when we came in. Those arrears we managed to clean. By December last year, we had paid all the arrears due to third parties. What we then have as between then and now, we do now have a small buildup of arrears, but we are getting 2 loans that shut out in the next 2 to 3 weeks. What we then also is, if you recall, we had CTA spending hundreds of millions over budget every year. We had Palala Fund spending hundreds of millions over budget. We've shut those trading accounts to make sure that they now spend within budget. So now, obviously, the spend does not happen at CTA. It now happens through the Ministry of Works. And there was a bit of pain when we did this again. But by now, last year, they spent below budget for the first time in I don't know how many years. Palala Fund, we've received external help on Palala Fund, be able to revamp that. So we still have the Palala Fund working efficiently, but the abuse that was taking place there has stopped. We have changed from a government would issue what you call remeasurable contracts. So the market, and we would our capital projects, roads being done, the likes being remeasured, somehow meant as government we spent hugely over budget on these capital projects. And what I'm telling you is not, our recent Article 4s for the last 10 years as a government. What an Article 4 was something that is the IMF come and analyze your country and they look at it. What I'm telling you now is the last Article 4s. It's all been, we've known it as a country. We just battled to deal with it. But these capital projects, as cabinet, now we've come out to say no more remeasurable contracts. We now go for lump contracts, which means that we know exactly what the price is. We agree on the price up front. The contractor might charge you 5 to 8 more, but at the same time, you know now what you're going to pay. There's no surprise. There's no like, okay, well now the soil wasn't good, or there's some kind of reason why these price escalations would go through the roof. We've managed to bring quite strong budget spend within government. So generally now, obviously we find that PAC is still looking at budget overspends. But if you look at what they're looking at now, the amounts, one is not looking at the same amount it was a few years ago. So hence what we've been doing, Mr. Mamba, is really trying to get our macros in our economy back on track, to get the economy back on a sustainable path. to get our reserves healthy. Our reserves now in general have been above 3-month import cover for a very long time compared to before. We were into very troubled zones. Our arrears being paid, get the economy back healthy again, and we are starting to see the results, Mr. Mamba. So if you look at 2020, our GDP dropped with 1.9%, which wasn't great, but in the region we did better than everyone virtually in the region with the amount that we dropped. But the 2021, the numbers are looking like our economy grew with almost 7%. So it's and we're talking of very real growth in the region. Once again, 2020 they went down to a large number, and 2021 they didn't even recover the amount they went down in 2020. Whereas with us, we went down 1.9, up 7. We've got real growth. So what we're finding, and that is that it seems like the larger companies in Eswatini are reinvesting and putting a lot of money back into the economy, and a lot of expansions taking place, a lot of activity taking place there. So we have a certain amount of health in our large company sector in Eswatini. Unfortunately, COVID, our middle and our lower especially has been negatively affected by that. Those sectors do recover very quickly, and with the measures that we've done, reducing repo rates, giving extra bank assistance, extending repayment periods, doing what we can as government and in the space, we believe that we've tried to cushion as much as we can there to try to relieve that. So a big picture, I know day to day it's still not looking great, Mr. Mama, but the big picture, there is a turn happening, and there is a shift, and I fundamentally believe that we are definitely getting onto the right track. We're not there yet. There's still a lot to fix. But there are some big improvements that have already taken place, which we have managed to get right in the last few years.
Thank you very much, Minister. And maybe just before I go on to more technical questions, there's so much that you've said that is good from government and the growth and all the initiatives that you're announcing. Now, why the complacency? Why is government so quiet about these things until you are quizzed about them on Channel Maswati? Why don't we tell the public about what we do that is good for the nation?
Hey, Mr. Mamba, somehow, as human beings, when it comes to good news, no one really, when you read the good news in the newspaper, you somehow skip the page. When you get to the tough stuff and the bad news, you somehow dig in and you read it better. We're trying to tell the story. We're trying to get the story out there. My budget speech, had certain elements in. One does put it out there. But find that the narrative that continues after you've spoken, the focus is generally on the negative rather than on the positive. One doesn't find necessarily channels like yourself where you can, rather amplify the positive. So I can't agree with you more. We need to do this better. We need to somehow fix it. The positives that we're having are definitely not being told. We've just come from spring meetings now, and today, a very senior person in the World Bank really was commending us. They said, sure, Eswatini, of all the countries we're looking at, us managing to hold it all like this and do these improvements, what they call building back better. They say, you're a great example of building back better compared to most other economies. So you are right. We need to get this right, Mr. Mamba, and help us with it.
I definitely will do. Minister, also, before I came to this interview, I checked our Gini coefficient as a country. We're quite high, even comparing with South Africa, but there's just one problem that I realized in terms of the balance of payment. What are we doing about it? Montigny itself is exporting raw material instead of adding value to the product. When are we going to produce our own stuff so that our balance of payments are balancing?
So thanks. So the balance of payments, you are right, Mr. Mamba. Last month, we saw a decline in balance of payments, and one will always see these short-term things taking place. But we are very blessed, and I say blessed because it's not necessarily, it's difficult to manage these things. But our balance and payments are generally positive. So if you look at the past 5 years, we've had a very strong positive balance of payments, which means that your forex, your exports versus imports, you're ending up with money with us, and it's the central bank that's actually been quite smart now. And I think the first bill that I tabled, which was their bill, I just did the work of tabling it, was actually giving central bank permission now to actually hold on to this, which really we should have done earlier, holding on to the forex that comes into the country, and hence our reserves have been growing because of exactly that point, because of our trade balance being positive in general. So you will find months when we dip, like last month. In fact, this year is predicted we might actually might go down slightly this year. It might be negative, But in general, we are positive because of the industries that we have, being the soft drink, obviously, textile, forestry, those kind of industries coming up. And so, but hence we have actually recognized exactly what you're speaking to now, where if you look at our industry, it takes the three bigger industries, and one can say, it is sugar, it is textile, and forestry. We need to integrate, these vertically integrate these more aggressively. And so if one takes Montigny, let's maybe use Montigny as an example. The forest industry was actually exporting a huge amount of logs. So you actually cut the tree and send the log across the border, and it goes off for chipping in Richards Bay or processing somewhere else, which isn't the case much anymore. So what you find now is industries, the forestry and sugar, are doing what you call primary processing. So we are now at least taking the log, cutting it into a plank, or making chipboard from it, or making a treated pole from it, not just a pole. And we are now exporting products that have been primary processed. And sugar, we're not in sugar cane, we are exporting that's been processed. What we now need to focus on, the low-hanging fruit for economic growth at this stage, is definitely now vertically integrating these two industries upwards, which means that we now need to, Montigny must, for instance, put in an industrial park, and they need to get someone to make beds, make furniture, make wooden products here, instead of these products being made elsewhere, since the raw materials are coming from here, and that person will have an advantage of being based right near the plant. And the sugar industry, we should be attracting people making Sweet Aid, whatever gets made with our sugar, we should be attracting those into a sugar industrial park, which again we are working on very aggressively in Eswatini, to be able to have those vertically integrated, normally better pay, better return kind of jobs as well. By the way, it's not your general labor kind of jobs. You're now talking of more technical jobs, engineers, the whole range of expertise that one needs in these kind of industries. But at the same time, textile, we also now need to integrate down textile industry. We're quite vulnerable, being quite reliant on the textile industry, but importing the raw material. So you will find now in our next phase of Mkondo Gwavuma, a project where where we've been doing obviously big dams and irrigation schemes in the sugar industry. The next one, we got a big plan to actually go for the cotton industry, to actually put about 10,000 hectares to start with into cotton, actually have cotton grown here, have a ginnery, make it into yarn, make the full material in Eswatini, and then obviously we then have the material to make the clothes that we're producing anyway. So that, in my opinion, is definitely the growth that needs to take place. You spot on. We now need to take it to the next level, go beyond primary processing or go downwards towards the actual growing, because we have these how can I say, low-hanging fruit already, and we now need to take advantage of these things. We have what you call it a edge. One of my sayings in business prior was always saying, if you don't have a competitive edge, then don't compete. It was one of my sayings, because if you're just going to go with no competitive edge into an industry, you're going to find it very tough, and your chance of success is actually quite slim. Whereas if you have a competitive advantage and now you go into that industry, your chances are a lot higher and a lot better of success.
Minister, thank you very much. And also I'm prompted to go back to the question as to why don't we talk about this? I mean, there's so much good that you're talking about, but now the biggest question right now is all these initiatives, very good initiatives, when are they going to interpret themselves into something meaningful in terms of creating more employment to the unemployed in the kingdom?
Look, obviously we are on quite an aggressive track. So at the moment we do have, there's strong plans in place. We're trying to put pressure on the private sector. Again, maybe use Montigny as an example. I don't think it's fair for government, for instance, to put up an industrial park, for forestry. I think the forest industry needs to invest in that. So we're putting a lot of pressure on the industries, be it the forest industry, to put up the industrial parks themselves, which could be a business on its own, by the way. If government needs to build a road or something to it, obviously one can consider that. But these industrial parks should actually be, we believe, can be financed within those private sector space. And the same with the sugar. We do believe that the sugar park, for instance, the sugar park at Skoope, Already we have beautiful highways now going through there. School pipping at the airports, whatever cargo you're producing that needs to be flown off internationally, you're right there. We already have tar road access, clean water, electricity supply already at that place. It's not going to cost much to put an industrial park for sugar at Skoope, which is ideally situated now in the sugar area for value adding and for things to be able to take place from there. And so I don't believe, I think in our next year's budget, we should be seeing these kind of things coming through. At the moment, in our current budget, we still, even though, as I was saying earlier, the budget has been cut quite heavily, you will find that our budget for factory shells is now actually being really prompted and really pushed. And what we're trying to do is as a government, we're trying to, long term, we don't believe that the textile industry, as a macro industry, I'm not saying it might be impossible to move everybody, but in time to move the textile industry out of Matsapa, out of industrial areas, and move them to more rural areas. Rather put a factory, a textile factory near where the people are living. Obviously, there needs to be a tarred road, there needs to be clean water, there needs to be power. But if we have those components there, we can put factories around rural areas so that people can actually leave from their homes and be able to leave home, go to work, and go back to home, even if they're catching a taxi. That's an industry in its own. And actually, that night sleep in their home, look after their own children, and actually go from home to work with your own food. It'll fix a whole lot of wrongs, because what we are also affecting socially, we are creating social problems in our country by having the textile industry with low paying jobs in Matsapa, and now that individual must still look after themselves, pay for water and lights, pay for rent, still somehow get to work if it's maybe not walking. And so the budget has got about 350 million for factory shells. We're starting to spread those out. They will not be built in the Matsapa space for textile, and in time we want to see if we can even move those industries out. Have it as a real industrial park for industry to be taking place there, so that if someone is working there, you're earning a whole lot better pay. So at least you can afford to bring your family close by, keep the family structures more intact, and actually work from home again, go to work and try and get your industry. So this is also on the cards. We're already working on this. This year's budget is in us to put the factory shells around. There's a lot of pressure on us for more textile industries wanting to come in. And we are saying, if you want to come in, that's great, but we're now giving you a factory near the rural areas, and no longer in Matsapa.
Let me come to the difficult one. We've seen some of the initiatives that the minister introduced with regards to the import cars. Most of them are gone right now. And what are you doing to alleviate the situation? Because now we don't have a place where to buy cars. And then is government being assisted in any way with regards to the SACU receipts?
Yeah, thanks. You're right. I became very unpopular during that time, Mr. Mamba, when I was with the ministry. The government was, but I was somehow isolated in that process. But when the government made a decision to actually reduce the age, so please understand, we did not cut import cars. We did not stop that. But we were becoming the dumping ground, of the world for the old vehicles. And the reason why they're getting sent here is because the emissions back where they come from are too high. Hence, the emissions here are also obviously extremely high. But what we did was we reduced the years. So instead of us allowing a 15-year-old to come in, we brought it down to 11 years. The impact thereof has also seemed to be bigger than what we expected. Also, just to be honest, Mr. Mamba, we expect industry to possibly halve, but the industry has probably gone down to maybe 20% of what it was before, which wasn't necessarily. We didn't go down that heavily, but that was just proving how much of those very, very old cars we were bringing in as a country. Our view on the matter remains the same. As I'll get to the SACU benefits, but one obviously we always put people before revenue, before different things. And if one just puts the people hat on, Mr. Mamba, it is, if you go speak to your relatives who might have bought a 15-year-old car or a 12, 13-year-old car in the last 5 years, how many of them are still happy with the decision that they made? I understand it's wonderful getting your first set of wheels. There's a few feelings in the world like owning your own car. I agree with that, and we understand that. But at the same time, one has to look at the bigger picture, is to say, is that individual really better off 3 years from that? Would that 40,000 Emalangeni not have been spent somehow better? Wouldn't he you're better off in 4 years' time than having a car that's probably parked under the tree, or probably sold as scrap, or in some kind of accident, rather than having that cash available to be able to do whatever in his home, business, whatever other environment in? So that's the one element. The other element is definitely the fact that carbon emissions. I mean, most African countries limit these cars at about 8 years. They don't allow vehicles older than 8 years to their shores, and they don't even have SACU. They are just making that reason so that they're not the dumping ground of old scraps in the world, and they're protecting their citizens against this kind of dumping abuse that sometimes takes place. And hence one really one has to come in sometimes as a government and make the bigger right decision. And so, but at the same time, on the SACU front, so these measures are now, we did the measures about 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago, everyone will remember, and with SACU it takes a long time for this thing to come through. So we are only now to reap the fruits, if I can call it that, in SACU from these measures that we did. The year that we are in now, the prediction from SACU was that we were going to get 4.3 billion Emalangeni in the year that we are in. We did not get 4.3 billion, we got 5.8 billion. And some of those reasons are because our percentage of our SACU went up because of what we are now also looking at the following year, where the following year the prediction was, I think, 5.3 or something like that billion Emalangeni. Already SACU is telling us it's going to be 8.7 billion Emalangeni. And by the way, that's still not capturing all of the measures. My gut feeling is it'll be north of 9 billion Emalangeni compared to the 5 point something that we were going to get. So it's got a very big, and obviously the imports wasn't the only measure. There were measures that we did, the fuel, general strictness at the borders. There were a few things that we did to try to improve this, and the results are definitely showing. And in the economy, if you just take today's situation that we're actually on the call for, these allowances, I would much rather have a few billion Emalangeni in my fiscus to really be able to make sure that we don't have this kind of problems in our country. Our cash flows are really a lot sorted out, but not have the old cars and possibly import fuel from different places. So I'm very confident, even more confident, that we made the right decision and that we did the right thing. Is everyone happy with it? Obviously not. Some people were affected, but we have to take the masses. We have to take the people that we saw today. Or would they prefer to have Dubai, rather refer to have more allowances and allowances on time? I think the right thing is to say, no, let us rather get more money into our economy. And when we have that cash in the economy, we can do a whole lot more with it.
I understand you very well in terms of getting some money into the fiscus, and it's very good, it looks very good. But now the problem is most of the Swazis cannot afford to go to the banks and get the money. Why can't we then get the money that is from the fiscus and put it in the banks as collateral so that we have new wheels? Isn't that a good suggestion, Minister?
So Mr. Mamba, we can obviously do all sorts of things. If our economy is better, I mean, from next year we are now on a sustainable path. Our SACU is going to be increasing. We are no longer actually going to be, we're standing on our own 2 feet and actually standing strong and saying, right, okay, we are now in a much more stable place. We can start looking at all those different decisions. We possibly can look. We do need to recapitalize our banks. I'm fully with you. So if Eswatini Bank and FinCorp, for instance, could get an injection from government, it'll be wonderful. We've last done that very long time ago. Currently, they've been, looking for loans themselves and carrying on. Whereas if government can look at things, as we've done with the Reconstruction Fund, for instance, and the the SME Fund on the 45 million. Yeah, we've done little bits of it in the meantime. But it'll be wonderful to get back into the habit of looking at that, so that they can look at more concessionary elements for eMaSwati wanting to buy wheels, for instance. I do believe that it's better to buy. Obviously, if one can access the funding, but you find that repaying a vehicle, instead of buying a vehicle for 40,000 Emalangeni and paying a lot of money on maintenance going forward, it's probably better to buy a new vehicle a small new vehicle, the repayment might be higher. It might be a 3.5, 4,000 a month repayment, but you main up there and you have a vehicle for a very long period of time compared to the other option. And so, but you are right, we do need to reconsider all of this. Just at the moment, under the very tight constraints that we have, it's obviously difficult, but we definitely see, not long term, over the near term, things should be improving quite a bit, and we'll be able to start considering all of these kind of measures.
Talking about the construction fund, is it operational? Because we see some of the demolished structures still in the same position. What's the story about that?
Been working quite hard, Mr. Mamba. They definitely are active. They definitely are continuing. 100 million plus, as far as I know. I don't have an up-to-date update with me, but 100 million plus has already been spent from the reconstruction fund. The Minister of Commerce mentioned the numbers the other day, but there's definitely a lot of progress going on there. It's obviously quite difficult to say, burn structure for burst. One's not sure who is applying, who's not applying. Some people could obviously from their pockets afford to start reconstructing straight away, and then we coming with a fund to actually compensate them for the money that they've spent if they've kept all the paperwork and been very diligent with that. Other companies possibly just couldn't afford, didn't have it all to actually start the building process, so they might have now put the applications in. The assessments might be going on, but because it's such a bulky amount, the team working on it are running around almost on a daily basis going out there, because we actually do need to eyeball each investment that's been claimed on, because obviously there have already been many attempts at people trying their luck with much bigger amounts in it. So one has to be quite careful with the distribution of this money. But you might find that some people are actually still waiting for the application to be finalized. That's probably the case with some of the situation out there.
The subversive elements are still continuing with the destruction and burning houses. Are those people affected still eligible for the fund?
Not. So at the moment the fund was, the day it was gazetted was actually the day that it was the cutoff as well for when people could put in applications. But at the same time, what we are seeing is, it looks like the fund won't be fully utilized because we have kept it at a 60%. You can only claim up to 60% of the money that was due, and because of that, there should be money left in the fund, and so we will reconsider that at some stage once we get a better feeling for where the fund is landing. We are hoping that we could possibly come back and consider some of the things that have subsequently been affected. But as we sit here, it is not the situation, Mr. Mamba.
You've almost addressed everything that really needed a Channel S, but isn't there anything that we haven't asked you that you may want to dissipate to the public?
Let me think about it. Thanks for the opportunity. I suppose as a nation, we really do need to regroup and kind of really look at the way forward. It is an opportunity that we have just to kind of try and press the reset button and to try and do what we can to be able to improve our economy as much as in the world. Obviously there's pain all over the place. We don't have a monopoly on internal strife, and we don't have a monopoly on our climate issues. So it's a matter of, as a country, us trying really to continue down the road we are, continue trying to cut certain things. As you will know, there's now we've done a study on the parastatals. We still feel that there's a certain amount of waste, I suppose is the right word, in parastatals. Some are running fantastically, some are brilliant and doing a great job, but we feel that we could merge some of them, bring some into the ministries, privatize one or two, shut one or two down in this, and the study is now being done on this and has already passed the cabinet stage. It's going to be a very tough process, but we're going to be trying to do that in the next 18 months. And again, make another additional saving there. That saving we make goes straight back into the fiscus for better spend. At the moment, there's definitely huge focus on education and huge focus on health. We do need to try and get a better bang for buck in these two industries. At the moment, for instance, there's constant outcry on medicines in the country. And again, I can vouch for the fact that there's a budget that's being requested. There's a budget, the budget is approved. The budget then goes through all the processes of tender board of the cases, and the budget gets spent. As an example. But for some reason, we are still constantly hearing of medicine shortages. So whatever's causing these problems, whatever's causing the pain that we have in the country, we need to work on this. It is within is a lot of our trouble. So we need to really try and get to a point as a country where we stand together and try and solve these problems rather than make them bigger. And so on a lot of these matters, we do need to really try and see what we can do to improve on the education and on the health fronts, because it's the only way we're going to really ultimately be better off as a nation. At the same time, we have climate change really affecting us quite badly, Mr. Mamba. This last year, we've had 5 incidents, 1 or 2 large ones, but there were about 5 altogether. And always one having to build homes or put roofs back on houses or build bridges, and it costing the economy a lot of money. NDMA ran out of money, I think, in the second event already, and we had to now find ways of putting money back into NDMA to try to assist them to be able to assist the people quickly and try and fix that. So as a country, we're going to have to try and become more climate resilient. We're going to have to learn to, unfortunately, maybe even, I know it sounds strange, our houses to be a bit stronger, have our stormwater drainage to be a bit bigger, to be really diligent on keeping stormwater drains open so that we don't have massive troubles when those kind of thing comes. We need to really have water storage taken more seriously, bulk water infrastructure, hence we're building these big dams that we are building in the country. And so we do need to look at all these factors and do what we can to try and adapt and to try and change and to try and become more resilient to these climate change effects. It is extremely unfair how these climate change effects are hurting us. As Africa, we are having I think the biggest consequence of climate change hitting us as a continent, and we've contributed something like 2% climate change as a continent. It is really not fair. So we are obviously speaking out as countries to say to the world, countries that have caused this problem, you really need to step up to the plate and do your part and come and assist the countries like us that are really suffering the consequences of things that have been done by those countries for many years. So there's a this unfairness. We do need to address that. We do need to look at it, and we must see what we can do to try to fix these things as a country, and in partnership with other countries, developed countries, which have contributed more towards the carbon emissions in the first place. So all these things going on, Mr. Mamba, it is 1,000 moving parts, and unfortunately we need to just try and, as a country, keep an eye on all of them, try and manage all of them, and try and do the best we can for the nation and for their Maswati.
Minister, and I believe that the saying which says charity begins at home, and you are very well aware that what revitalizes the economy is a roads infrastructure. Now let's talk about the road from Mhlabanyatsi to Bunya, and then the road from Malkens to Bunya. I believe that you are closer to that one. When are you going to start dealing with that road? Because charity has to begin at home.
It's obviously very difficult being a minister, and the moment if one had to now all of a sudden try to push and prioritize certain things near where you've got a company or near where you live, the criticism is terrible. So I've tried to steer away from almost trying to do something. A spot on, Mr. Mam. I mean, the road from Mhlabanyatsi to Bunya is really awful. I think the company here built a cheap road probably like 50 or 60 years ago. So as far as I know, that the Montigny tries to patch it all the time and tries to keep at least some semi-surface on it. But it really does. These things do definitely need to be looked at. But one does obviously try and say, well, let's we'll get to it when we get to it. One does have these roads that desperately need to be done. There has been a lot of maintenance, and I must say I've been so impressed seeing the quality of maintenance that's being done on the tarred roads. And the companies doing them are really stepping up and doing, I feel, a great job into it. And so this year, obviously, we have 150 million in as a capital budget for the Ministry of Work, so you can start actually resurfacing those roads quickly. Because once we've now finished patching them properly, If one just puts a small surface on those roads, it'll seal them properly again and keep them again for another 10, 15 years. And we just got to then just keep the maintenance better. So as a country, we're constantly building new things. We're constantly building new roads, but we're really not great at maintaining our stuff, be it buildings, equipment, roads, all these things. So hence the road agency that we're pushing for now is really something that we need to try to get right. Our maintenance of our buildings, we need to change something. It definitely is not working at the moment. It's embarrassing. A lot of our government buildings, we need to work something out and try and find a better way, be it maybe getting, if one thinks outside the box, maybe one gets the housing board or someone like that to take over. They do a great job in maintaining the infrastructure that they have. But we need to look at all these measures of government and kind of find a better way. And often the better way is even bringing private sector in somehow. Private sector coming in, doing a lot of the functions that we possibly do as government. Obviously, we need to monitor that. There's always abuse that might take place there unless you monitor it and have a strict program in place. But at the same time, I believe, just like the road maintenance now, being done by the private sector, I believe that we need to try and unlock and try and get our internal government functioning in a whole lot better space within the near term, and we're obviously working on a whole lot of that.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Just as a parting shot, what message do you have for the doctor who's watching right now, the nurse who's watching now, and the patient who's watching right now from the government hospitals? When are they going to get help?
So again, we obviously see the plea from the nurses for more staff. It is obviously we need to consider it. We need to look at it. We are looking in general. We obviously have the hiring freeze, but we do see, for instance, police. Police do definitely need more staff. We have to look at correctional. The health sector we obviously did look at during COVID. It's just that now that COVID is over, about half of the nurses that we had employed, we then did not renew the contract since COVID is now over. But do keep in mind that even though 400 did not get renewed, I think there were about 400 that are still there, in other words, from the COVID. So one is just now, I think, doing a reassessment in the Ministry of Health to see how many nurses do we need. And one has to look at this. One cannot hospitals without enough nurses. But at the same time, one obviously also needs to make sure that are stations being filled? Are people coming to work on time? One has to just have a good look at everything before one just throws human resource at something without possibly fixing core problems. So that is happening, and we do need to take it seriously. The medicines thing, we're trying to work out exactly what's going on. There's an audit that's being done by the AG's office on the medicines at the moment. The report is going to be coming out shortly, just to try and work out, what is happening here. How come is the budget fully spent, fully paid? But for some reason, we're still not solving the problem, because when with office, we had something like 600 million outstanding to the medical, for medicines. We caught that up. We were paying spot on time. As I sit here, there's again a small amount, or there's an amount of money outstanding for medicines, but that's now within the last 2 months that has accumulated. We actually have been paying medicine bills very diligently and really been on top of it for the last while. Hence, it really seems like there's a problem somewhere else to find out and need to try and sort out as a government. Again, doctors, we need to. It's the same thing, and one can say that almost for every department. I don't think we can hold our head up high and say, "Wow, this department, there's nothing wrong." There's a whole lot of work needed, but unfortunately, these things don't happen overnight. Some of them are very painful to fix, and it might take a bit of time for us to just get on top of all these matters.
Very much, Minister. Thank you very much. And I know that you may have been in very high duties right now. I believe that you had so many appointments, but you respected us, and here you are addressing the people. And I do believe it is our fervent hope as a channel that you are going to continue with this. And we do have time right here on Channel Master to tell the people. I mean, hundreds of thousands are watching tonight, and some of the stories are very new to them. And I believe that this is not the last time that you come to us and talk to us and tell the public what you're doing, because there's so much that you're doing that we didn't know as a channel. So thank you very much indeed, Minister.
It's been a real pleasure, Mr. Mamba. Thank you. You're also a kind host, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I'd love to at some stage. Thank you so much.
Indeed, nebenkosi lenhle-ke induna leyo induna etikote mafa Mnumzane Neal Rijkenberg. We are very much honored to have had an interview with him for the first time here on Channel Maswati. Sibonga kakhulu nebenkosi lenhle ukuthi induna ize ifike la noma beyikhuluma ngetebongqondo mshina ukuthi chaze tonke letindzaba kusukela ekuqaleni kwekuthi kutawuhamba njani in 2 months time bantwana abantu abese batholile imali yabo nebenkosi lenhle babiyele khona etikolweni. Wachaza ke lapha ukuthi inkinga lenkulu ibe yiCovid ngoba inkinga nalapha sase siyahamba nebenkosi lenhle sihamba ngetindzaba tawumnotho ukuthi kutawulungiswa ngimangele ke bekunene lapha ukuthi letinto esitikhulumela emaceleni uhulumende uyatilungisa mane lenkukhandle ukuthi uhulumende utilungisela eceleni angaba sakhuluma nebenkosi lenhle cha bekunene lenikhala ngawo siyakwenda umsebenzi bawuzama nebenkosi lenhle imisebenzi basinyana itawulungiseka akusinto bathi Rome was not built in a day ngakho ke bakuzama konke lokho bayezama futhi ukuthi tinto letetekhola kangwane sale tiba nevalue le mali yakangwane into yokuchubeka ibe yinengi so imisebenzi itawanza nebenkosi lenhle imigwaqo itawulungiswa kunenge nje bangwane ngimaswa ke ukuthi empeleni kunenge lo nto kahulumende kodwa sine asikwati kusho ke nasingakwati sine lapha kumahlaze sangweni nebantu nebenkosi lenhle nabo abakwati lokho bangwane ke lapha ku Channel Maswati lo ngena sibambele inkinobho lapha Gebile wakantshangase ubambisene lapha naye Julisa wakamamba la ngibona bahlanganisa Thombe bajikisa badlale ngato bese ke kubana wezile wakakhanya ngesound engineer wethu lapha bese kubana gcina amadonsela benkosi lenhle yena lo sister lapha Julisa wakamamba bese kubana Bexisa wakankhambule benkosi lenhle producer wethu lo ngalapha benkosi lenhle ungfloor manager namhlanje bese kubana Linda Linda washonga nebenkosi lenhle lijana nebenkosi lenhle lapha letafuza tindzaba kanaye bekangisita nje lapha nalapha nebenkosi lenhle kunike ama clips etindzaba bese lapha kuba ngu director wethu walamhla lapha ngikhanyisile wamabuza sesembele benkosi lenhle ukuthi nijabule kakhulu kuba nathi ngisike hayi nebendlovu yemhlaba lo ngiveza khwesho wabuza lo ngiveza emhlaba ohlala kwevela kubele besimunye ngeshare likabazi lapho uzagitsela phaka lobamba kosuku ndilamphicwa kamthethwa wayawubukela silofa ukuthi ngalaba umkhanza khuma umhlabathi ngani besuke baqankaba la bayothi labakhanza ekhondula mngayifaka ukuthi lijobo libheke etulo vulgete loyo kubehlela siqeza sililo wathi gidza indlovu bese kuyindlovukazi bayethe Nkosi indlovukazi mhlekazi bathathe umfana ke lapha ubonga yona ingonyama
sibekela mgumuthi weimpondo ziphumule nje ngabe enkomeni zisabani awulila ngaphesha kendvulo khombe Maswati wawulila ngaphesha kendvulo khombe abalodolozi siguduza kumnyama kuhlule sigidigidi sakamaphobane Mswati umiphiqile ngisho ngale sikhulule semnyama engane sibashisile bakwetele ndasebhlweni ngalozithakala nqabane namale mahlele sikhwahlende kamlumbi engane sibonile leso sikhuni uthi sakathi jikijele kangwane samlanzele etinyaweni kwasha iningizimu Afrika yongana kwayikwethuka sigodlo kaZulu kwakhangele mankengane kwakhetha umthandayo kwayikwethuka eMandebele nemaXhosa Mswati usimanga ingani ulidvala libhlophe libusheleleti kunakalisote lanyathela mahalinyane Mswati umiphiqile ngisho kale ngoletsheni kababe kangwane kanhlokohla ingani ihlelela ugodvoni tayihleka tinyoni ayihleka netaka amabhela kalanga Mswati usimanga ngisho kale ngule emnyama lembese umdzimba ingani kube embese mina mfokadza nabekuyesana emambala ngithukumele Mswati umiphiqile ingani uthebe lapho sebakuqambele manga msakandzaba wemana ngemambala ngeliqiniso lebe mangale nabokhokho bakho emandulo ngale nelive lakho Mswati liyadunutela bona bakangwane sebakubiza bakulayeza ingani live lakho Mswati selingenele emambukane nemahalinyane bathi kuphi emsakandzaba nala kangwane lemunga kubalela kuthatha waya ngisho esikoleni eNgilandi ingone ofuna lathi lokudzala kumandulo anike khandlela sale nemgqingizelela njengenkomisa ohlatshwa ingani seyingene imbubo esigodlweni ludzithini yase yambulala Cleopas ukuthi uthatha temnotho nimambala Mswati ngiphiqile unele kufika lapha kalobamba kwahoko mathi oshetongana insaba nemagquma ingani waseyingene imbubo yaseyingene ingwenyama ayothe wena phakathi wena unganga mathapha unganga luthe sebanganga wesilo sikhulu sebanganga wena ukune